It's beyond my ability to envisage.
And let me ask you an opinion. You've obviously you have some conversations with a lot of the negotiators and diplomats there in Tehran. To what extent are there conversations with other nations? And I'm talking about even the GCC nations, much less some of these other nations that would be directly affected in a negative way by the continuation of this blockade. What you said earlier in this program is that the Iranian side, if the MOU that we signed on June 17th would just be applied, then by the 30th day, there would have been something close to a resumption of at least full traffic based on what it was, based on the traffic, so that the oil would be flowing. But now then, because the United States added a southern corridor, which was not even part of the MOU, and we've decided to start using attacks, and we've gone back and forth, now here this blockade, to what extent do other countries around the world say, okay, I'm blaming Iran, or I'm actually blaming the United States here, because Iran is saying they would open the gates. Only the United States is saying, no, it has to be open on our terms or no terms. How is that being received as far as you know?
You know, that's a really good question. So far, the world has been on Iran's side. Even though Western media is extraordinarily hostile towards Iran and will always present Iran in a very caricaturish way, sort of like these, cartoon villain. But and the reason, one of the reasons is because the United States carried out this war of aggression and murdered the leader, and all that, and all these kids and so on. But another reason is Trump himself. Trump is so unpopular across the world, and he's seen as so erratic and so aggressive, the trade wars and so on, that it's almost impossible for me to envisage the world sympathizing with Trump. And even though, if anyone looks at the MOU, they'll know that Iran is right and that Trump is wrong. But Western media has that capability of misinforming people and making people believe that night is day and day is night often. But in the case of Trump, it becomes very difficult, and I don't think he's going to succeed. And it would have been very smart of Trump to actually carry out the MOU, because if he did, and it was Iran that was holding back for whatever reason, he could easily blame Iran. But he did the exact opposite.
Yeah, and it's hard to even imagine from a Western perspective, but he's actually putting Iran in the role of the rational actor. And somebody said, no, we're willing to do this stuff. We've agreed to this. We'll do it. And we were doing it until you stopped it. That's just one of the more shocking things that I can see. But we are where we are. Well, listen, if that's where we ended, this would be a really troubling development based on President Trump's Truth Social there. But that's not the only one. There's another one. And point number one, that's point number 5 we've been talking about. Point number 1 above that, and you tell me if there was a reason why it was number 1, because it seems that to the Iranian side, that's even more important than the Strait of Hormuz. And that is the issue of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. That was part of the requirement. President Trump said, I call the shots. I'm going to tell Israel what to do. They're going to withdraw. But then here, I just found this video yesterday. It was actually from 9 July. So about 4 days ago. Here's what the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has to say about this status.
בסיבוב הזה, אני אמרתי, יש הרבה בתקשורת הרגילה שאוהבים, מה הוא מאיים ומה הוא אומר. אין דבר שאיימתי בו ולא מומש. ויש תכלית לאמירות האלה. זה המסר שאתה משדר לכוחותיך, אתה משדר לאויבים, ואתה ממש את הדברים האלה. ואנחנו בלבנון, בעצם אמרתי, דרום לבנון תהפך לעזה. אנחנו נפעל לפי המודל של רפיח, אנחנו נשמיד שם את הכל, אנחנו נטפל בהם בדרך הזאת, וזה מה שעשינו.
Wow. I mean, to just say out loud, now he's saying it in Hebrew, but obviously the internet now carries things everywhere. He's just saying, yeah, we're going to turn Lebanon into Gaza and make it the Rafa plan, which means they're going to turn it into a moonscape. How does that square with Iran saying that we want to have the end of this war based on that?
There will be no agreement with the United States unless Article 1 is fulfilled. I mean, all of the articles have to be fulfilled, but Article 1 included. So either the Strait of Hormuz remains as it is, or in very, very limited in its ability for people to carry out trade, or the United States forces the Israeli regime to leave Lebanon. And the atrocities that they are carrying out in Lebanon are clear to everyone, and they admit it themselves. They say it with pride, how they slaughter people, how they destroy the villages, how they wipe out, they steal the trees, they burn the forest. It's just unbelievable what they do. It's a repeat of, as he himself admits, or says with pride, it's a repeat of Gaza. And in the West, Western media is indifferent. Western governments are indifferent. You don't see European parliaments or MPs screaming about the need to sanction Israel or anything like that. Instead, just today we heard that the British Parliament, I think, declared the Iranian Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. So while there's an ongoing genocide in Gaza, Iran's armed forces are declared a terrorist organization. That's how it works in the West. So Iran knows that unless in this world where the law of the jungle has been imposed, the only way to make sure that the people of Lebanon survive this ordeal is if the Iranians are steadfast and make sure that the United States will never be able to gain control over the Strait of Hormuz, and that the only way for the United States to be able to bring normality back to the global economy is through forcing the Israeli regime to end these atrocities in Lebanon.
And since Gary brought that up here, let me ask you about this. This is the news being reported today that former Iranian President Ahmadinejad had met with Mossad chief under an Israeli plan to install him as an Iranian leader. One claim I saw this morning said that Ahmadinejad had been placed under house arrest pending an investigation. What can you tell us about whether this is true or not?
I don't think any of this is true. I mean, why would if this was true, then the New York Times has basically signed his death warrant. Why would the New York Times or any other mainstream media outlet give the names of informants or spies or collaborators with foreign intelligence agencies? Whenever the Iranians capture a spy, always Western media would call that person a victim, an innocent person, a tourist, a teacher. I mean, Iran literally never arrests spies. They're always, according to Western media, they're always arresting innocent people. And then now they go out of their way to say, look, the former president of Iran who was seen in the funeral, he is one of ours. It doesn't make sense.
Well, and plus, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember President Ahmadinejad was viewed as the possibly the Antichrist when he was in because of his hostility to the West. I'm not sure why that Antichrist would suddenly turn on his own people. So it doesn't seem very plausible to me, I'll just say. But that's just the state of things today. One last thing I want to talk to you about before we let you go is President Trump released this Truth Social on the 10th of July, saying that 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded and aimed at the Islamic Republic of Iran, with thousands more to immediately follow should the Iranian government act on its threat, pronounced in many corners of the globe to assassinate or attempt to assassinate the president of the United States of America. That's what he said on the 10th. And then here, this was just yesterday, Moshe Rezai, who is one of the senior advisors to the Supreme Leader on Military Affairs, says that the issue of revenge is a serious and actionable matter. Revenge is part of the path of the revolution. If leader assassination becomes routine, no country will have security left. The path of revenge will be pursued. the Strait of Hormuz is more important, but let's stick on that last part. The path of revenge will be pursued. Should President Trump be worried?
Well, let me divide this into, let's say, three parts. One is that in the funerals, people were calling for revenge. It was a repeated slogan wherever you went, and they were very angry. And this sense of justice, the need for justice, is very clear. They said our leader was murdered, our children were murdered, our neighbors were murdered, our infrastructure was damaged and destroyed, and those who carried out these atrocities have to be punished. So that is a popular demand, and it puts a lot of pressure on the government and state institutions. The second is that the Iranians have seen that the United States, over the years, they've invaded country after country. They've destroyed Iraq, they've destroyed Afghanistan, they destroyed Libya. They crushed Syria and installed Al-Qaeda. They crushed Venezuela and taken the president hostage, and the list goes on, Cuba and so on. And if you go further back, Vietnam. Every time they destroy, and then they just walk away with no repercussions. And they can debate about whether this was a bad policy decision, but no one goes to jail for carrying out crimes against humanity. And this is what ordinary people in Iran are demanding. They're saying, look, this is one war where the Americans should not be allowed to just walk away. They have to pay a price. And so that is the argument. Now, the leaders in Iran have not said anything about the state being directly involved. They've just said that, yes, that's justice. There must be justice, and there will be justice. But they never said that there's going to be some organization or some part of the armed forces or intelligence services that are going to be instructed to carry out such operations. That doesn't exist, and in previous occasions that did not exist either. But one final thing that I do think is interesting is the Trump response and the Trump reaction. In my opinion, he's only encouraging people who would like to see war between Iran and the United States to actually assassinate him. He's already had 2 assassination attempts when he was running for presidency. We never figured out and never heard who was behind it, what was this real story. And by making such statements, he's creating an incentive for perhaps those very same people to carry out a third attack on him.
And I'm sorry, let me go back to here, because based on what you said, I think on the second of the things that you said here, here is Rezai, who's saying the path of revenge will be pursued. Now, if it's not the government doing it, there's not this secret cabal, then what does that mean? Because then it sounds like there won't be any. It'll just be words. So what does he mean?
Well, first of all, they've said that those who deserve punishment, the list is long. And so it's not just Trump, it's all of those who were involved in the decision-making process and pulling the trigger and killing all those kids at the Menab school and so on. So it's not just Trump. But I think basically what they're saying is that, there are people out there who feel that justice is necessary and they're going to do it. Doesn't mean that the Iranian government will, or the state will, have anything to do with it. But basically what they're saying is that there are people out there who I can't claim to know what they mean. What I'm saying is that there are people out there who will possibly pursue justice on their own and say that the kids in Menab, they deserve to get revenge, or their families deserve to get revenge. The people of Iran, or the people of Lebanon, or the people of Yemen, the people of Palestine, and so on.
And let me ask you a question here, because we're not just talking about this, the last 4 or 5 months or whatever since February, but to what extent is it on the front of the people's minds in Iran? When you're going back to President Trump's assassination of Qassem Soleimani, of the destruction by Israel of the embassy compound in, I think it was 2024. And then in the 2025 war, where there was, as I recall, and you can correct me if I'm misremembering here, where there was a lot of assassinations of senior scientists and generals, where missiles went into apartment buildings and took out whole families, in addition to the person here in Tehran. So all kinds of things like that, in addition to this one, which also, in addition to the supreme leader and his granddaughter and so other family members, apparently like 40 some odd people that Netanyahu last week bragged about assassinating. Is it all together like that, or is this just now part of the background noise, and that's just the way world works today, and they're worried about this current stuff?
No, it's all together. In fact, when I go out on the streets, sometimes some people know me because I'm in media, and they stop me and say, if we had been tougher with them after General Soleimani's murder, they wouldn't have dared done this. If we had been tougher with them when they did so-and-so, they wouldn't have done this to us. And often during the funeral ceremony, I mean, there are many millions of people, like many millions of people, so big that even Western media couldn't deny it, because in the past they'd say it's AI or they just downplay it, but it was beyond belief. But I walked for many kilometers in the funeral, and then I walked back the same route, and it was packed. And many people stopped me. I can't say how many, maybe 200, like every couple of minutes or so. People would stop me, maybe one person, maybe a group of people, saying, "We want revenge. This is not enough." Most people are not satisfied with the MOU. I mean, not that they are necessarily against the negotiators, but they're unhappy about how it's implemented. I don't know what the percentage is of those who believe that we should, because there are those who say that there are lots of people who say we shouldn't have negotiated, we shouldn't have signed the deal, we should have gone on with the war. There are lots of people who are saying we should be tougher, like the deal is okay, but we should be much tougher in enforcing the deal. But if you combine these two arguments together, I think that's the strong majority of Iranians.
It's interesting, Gary, showing these pictures here. You say that it's hard to downplay the pictures. The CBS News, I remember seeing one particular one where in I think it was Karbala or Najaf in Iraq, said, quote, thousands of people support the funeral procession. Thousands, not hundreds of thousands, not millions. It was alleged 3.8 million, but so we are trying with that. Listen, one last thing that we got here. One of the things that was really stood out to me from some of my colleagues who were part of these processions themselves, covering it for Western media, Suleiman Ahmed being the most important one. He said the thing that maybe stood out to him more than anything else, along the lines you're saying there, is that they're saying the people that he talked to, they want to solve this problem once and for all. They don't want just some negotiated settlement that then we could go back 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever, and restart the thing. And they said, even if it costs half of our population to die, we're willing to do it. If we end up with 45 million people left in the country and we solve this problem with Israel and the United States, then that'll be worth it. That is a really strong statement. Can you assess whether that is hyperbole or just somebody he talked to, or is it accurate?
Well, I don't know about numbers and that sort of thing, but yes, no doubt. I mean, the Iranians have been suffering at the hands of the United States since 1953, since the coup against the government of Dr. Mossadegh. And then they had 25 years of police state, the Pahlavi rule. And then when there was a revolution, the United States was supporting the Shah on a particularly brutal and dark day called Black Friday, where lots of people were murdered in Tehran on the streets by the army. The next day, Jimmy Carter called and gave his support for the Shah. And then after the revolution, the U.S. supported separatist groups and terrorist organizations, and then encouraged Saddam to invade the country. And it's been a dark history from the beginning. There's a very good book, I may have said this on your show before, called Going to Tehran by Flint and Hilary Mann Leverett. And I think Americans should read the book. And they talk about the history of Iran in the United States in a much more objective manner than other Western writers. and they deal with many of the myths. And actually, they were saying when they wrote the book that if the United States doesn't move to change its policy, we're going to move towards conflict. And it turned out that their fears turned out to be quite valid. So the Iranians experiencing many years of maximum pressure sanctions, 2 wars in a year, and siege warfare. Obviously, the sentiment in Tehran would not be that far away from what your esteemed guest said. The Iranians say, we have to end it, bring an end to this oppressive state of affairs.
So as I see it, based on all the foregoing that we've talked about in this entire show here, Iran, if the Strait of Hormuz is not, if the MOU is not executed according to the terms that we signed, and especially the Strait of Hormuz being open and no southern corridor, no President Trump trying to run it, the situation with the frozen funds, with the sanctions being released, and Lebanon being evacuated by the Iranians, by the Israelis, there's not going to be any kind of a deal, no matter what President Trump does. If he goes back to full-scale war, if he causes all this trouble, that is the requirement now. So if we are in a situation right now, if President Trump doesn't do all those things, then the economic catastrophe is almost certainly going to start unfolding, because I don't see any chance that Iran is going to be compelled to do the things that Trump says. Do you see it any differently?
I agree completely. The only thing that I can imagine is that Trump speaks to his imaginary Iranian leaders, and then he goes back and implements the deal and says that those imaginary leaders promised me the world, and so now I'm going to implement the MOU. I can't think of any other way that at the moment that